Wow, it has been a while since I have done one of these. This is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to an RPG story time. Now, for those who don't know, this is where I go back through my years of role-playing game experience and basically tell you something about an amusing story or an informative story or maybe just an interesting thing that happened during one or more of my gaming sessions. I've got a number of them that I can bring to the forefront over however long I end up doing this, but hopefully I won't run out of stories anytime soon because I'm always making new memories. But for this one, I'm going to go back quite a ways, and I'm not sure if it's exactly the strongest story to bring back the series with, but I've been thinking back on it and found some amusement in it over the last couple weeks because I was actually designing a new dungeon for low-level players, and I remember back when I was running AD&D 2nd edition. This was well before 3rd edition came out, a couple years before it came out, and you had it once more limited options and yet more open options when designing monsters and encounters. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that you didn't have quite so much defined in terms of things to give creatures that you would in 3rd edition and that sort of branch of D&D, but you did have enough gear and equipment and tactics to satisfy players, and enough of that to kind of build and extrapolate off of new devices and new things. So while you didn't have a whole slew of alchemical items to equip your creatures with, you could kind of rule of thumb it off of what was there. So why do I mention this? Well, one of the things that a lot of DMs do, especially with regard to small humanoids, is they start giving them items, especially kobolds, because kobolds are known to put out traps. They're known to go ahead and use tactics. That's really the only way that kobolds can be a threat, unless you put them in great numbers. And when you have both great numbers and advanced tactics, they can be really, really dangerous. In fact, there is a whole trope based off of just souping up your kobolds, and I think it actually came from the 2nd edition era. It might have been the 3rd edition era, but actually it might have been the 1st edition era now I'm thinking about it. I'll try and look up that exact trope name. I think it's called Tucker's Kobolds or something, where you just take a standard group of kobolds or whatever, and then you just give them a fair amount of decent gear and just have them use tactics, and they will just demolish most parties, because let's face it, adventuring groups usually don't have the most cohesive strategies unless you're talking about a top-end group of players. So this kind of just setting the grounds for this story. I occasionally do that. I occasionally have my kobolds go ahead and just arm them to the teeth and use advanced tactics, but usually what I do with kobolds is I keep in mind that they don't necessarily want to just sacrifice themselves. So they will use these tactics, but they won't necessarily, form up like an actual army might and just take the group all on at once, unless they have some sort of severe advantage in terms of terrain or in terms of placement. However, and this stems back to the 2nd edition game I'm talking about, I will occasionally put 1 or 2 kobolds in that really break the mold. And in this case, it's actually a kobold that did not look like a threat at first to the party. They were adventuring in this dungeon, and I cannot for the life of me remember why they were there or what it was called. It's been a long time. I do remember the maps because I've got the maps for it. But it was basically like a 2-level dungeon complex set under some old ruins. And not all of the enemies were kobolds, but they had a little bit of a kobold tribe there. And the kobold tribe there basically were taking advantage of the fact that these ruins had been built by a more advanced society. So they were going in there, not necessarily mostly using advanced equipment or anything, but they basically went in there as a kobold tribe, barely had two sticks to rub together, and they find this ruin that was clearly built by a more advanced, more civilized culture. So they slide on in there, they set themselves up, and then they basically try to mimic the culture that was there before they got there. The long lost culture. I believe that it was actually elves that I had put in there. They had built the place long ago, but not your like standard tree loving elves, but more like gray elves. In second edition and first edition, gray elves, I think even in third edition, gray elves were kind of like your high tower, your high mage elves. They were the ones that were very intelligent. They were even further removed from humanity than your high elves. They were basically the elves that gave the rest of the elven race their reputation for being snooty and removed from society. So I had these kobolds basically trying to live up to this ideal, trying to pretend to be archwizards and such. And not all of them, it was a sort of amusing kind of adventure. So the players go in, they basically clearing this dungeon very methodically, very old school style, going room to room. And I had groups of kobolds in there pretending to be high priests, and groups of kobolds in there pretending to be archwizards, even though they only had like wands with one or two charges in them or whatever. And then I had a single kobold that was wandering around the main corridor. It was like this big hallway, big arched hallway with pillars running up and down the length, and it had branches off to not just the first level, but both levels of the dungeon. It was basically the main thoroughfare. And throughout the main thoroughfare and some of the branching halls, I had this one kobold just wandering around with a broom, with a push broom, and a cart filled with cleaning supplies. It was the Kobold Janitor. And I remember putting him in there as a joke at first when I was designing the adventure. And then I thought about it, and I was like, well, knowing my players are probably going to want to engage this guy even though he's basically harmless. Basically the only thing that I wanted this Kobold Janitor to do, he wasn't going to call any alarms. He wasn't going to do anything but clean up after battles. And he would go in there, and if there was a battle, he'd go in there and sweep up after it, make sure everything's nice and neat and clean. And I thought that would be an amusing thing to throw with the players. It wouldn't start any fights or anything. But I thought, well, players being players, they're going to attack this guy. So what do I do to make him challenging, but not be overpowered? So I went ahead and statted him out as not just a kobold, but he's a kobold fighter. Didn't give him any fancy magic or anything, just he's a kobold fighter. Made him a kobold fighter second level. The party was first level at this time, so he's a second level fighter. But here's the interesting part. I went ahead and gave them, because in second edition, characters, especially fighters, in fact only fighters, could do something called weapon specialization. And you see echoes of that in third edition later. Specialization basically gave you a bonus to hit, a bonus to attack, and an additional attack every 2 rounds for one particular weapon. So I'm thinking, well, what do I want to give this kobold fighter specialization in? And I'm thinking, okay, so he's got a push broom. What does a push broom resemble? Probably some sort of staff, maybe. It's kind of close. So I'm sitting there giving, okay, I'll give the Kobold fighter specialization in push broom and just mark it as a staff that has a penalty to hit. And then I'm thinking, well, what else could I do to make this Kobold something to be reckoned with? And yet not necessarily gonna wipe the party. Basically, I wanted to make the party regret engaging him if they decided to. So I'm thinking, well, what's on your average cleaning card? You've got maybe buckets of water. You know, some sort of bucket of water that can be kicked out and make a slick spot. Something that, you know, party members have to avoid. That's a good start. Maybe, you know, a dustpan with all of the dust that he's been sweeping up. You know, basically a garbage pail attached to it. Well, what do you do with that? Well, you can do a number of things with that. If it's actual hard debris, it could count as caltrops. If it's actual ash and dust, you could throw it in somebody's eyes to blind them. And then I thought, well, if we're going for blinding, let's take a look at some cleaning supplies, because remember, this is all set in a dungeon that was once a higher society, and even though it's basically your medieval fantasy kind of trope game that it was designed for, I'm thinking, you know, gray elves, with their vast intellects, probably had some things equivalent or maybe more advanced than your standard medieval tropes. So I'm sitting there going, okay, so maybe they've got some sort of cleaning supplies. So as a joke, I go ahead and put together like little metal bottles or little glass bottles with, you know, spray things, the little trigger spray bottles full of cleaning supplies. Well, cleaning supplies can blind you for a while. In fact, almost permanently if they are more caustic ones. They can irritate senses, and if you've got a strong enough spray, they can spray quite a bit. You can fill a 3 or 4 foot cube with a couple sprays of a spray bottle. So all of a sudden, this Kobold, you know, he's got something he can use an action on. He can not only kick your butt with a broom, but he's got a cart full of stuff that he can use to blind you, to set up slick spots on the floor. And then I'm thinking, you know what? How many cleaning supplies are actually flammable? Now, I didn't give him anything to light it with, but your average adventuring party usually has torches and lanterns, especially ones with exposed flame for some reason. You know, even though, theoretically speaking, if you're in an actual dungeon, a lantern's probably going to be way better than a torch, because a torch is going to fill it up with smoke and it's just going to blind you. But a lantern, you know, it's got an enclosed flame, may not be a particularly bright lantern, but it'll probably do you better than an actual just open flame torch. But of course, in those days, your average player didn't really think about that much. So, of course, when it came down to running it, they walked into that dungeon with torches, because you gotta remember, second edition doesn't have it has the light spell, but it doesn't have the light spell at the cantrip level. So if you want to cast light, you're gonna spend a first level spell slot on it, and that's gonna be it for the day. This is, you know, second edition. So they go in there, torches blazing, and they start clearing it room to room. They make short work of most of the kobolds, and I had put the Kobold Janitor on the encounter table like 3 times. One for the janitor encounter himself, and then a couple times for things like you hear in the distance a cart squeaking along, squeak, 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 as if it's being pushed, or you hear a broom swish, swish along the floor. And for some reason, they kept getting the audio cues in the encounter table, because this one thing, I'll have to do a video on encounters. You know, not every encounter on an encounter table has to be an actual fight. It can be something off in the distance. I've learned this from Ravenloft, actually. You can put things on your encounter table that build atmosphere or they give opportunities to investigate. But anyway, for this matter, they've got the audio cues, and they basically ignored them, and they didn't go look for this guy. But when they eventually did come around a corner and encounter this kobold pushing his broom, his cart's like just a couple feet away, and they stop and they look at this kobold janitor, and they've just finished clearing like half of this dungeon. They've killed kobolds like literally every 5 feet. And they're seeing this kobold janitor, and this kobold janitor is actually in the process of wiping the blood off of the walls from one of their earlier fights. And the main fighter of the group, starts going up there and start calling, hey, you! Like he's expecting this kobold to turn around and challenge him. And so I'm thinking, well, that's unexpected, because I was actually expecting them to just jump this kobold janitor. I was actually expecting them to either completely ignore him or just jump him straight away. So I was actually kind of impressed that they didn't do that right off. I was impressed that they made the attempt to talk to him. Kudos on that group, and kudos on any group that sees an unusual creature and decides to take a moment to see if it'll actually talk to him. But in this case, the kobold janitor stops. He doesn't have much to say to him because he can't understand common. I admit, at the time this was written, it was like the mid-90s. So I had this kobold janitor basically do the equivalent of looking at the group and saying he doesn't speak English in Kobold. This was before they made kobolds mini dragons. This was back when kobolds were still kind of goblin-like creatures. So the kobold turns to the group and basically speaks in kobold. It's basically like, I no understand your English, basically. It's completely stereotypical, I know, but it's back in the 90s. And so nobody in the group speaks kobold, amazingly. Because kobolds are actually on the language list for a lot of demi-humans. I don't think... There was one elf in the group, and for some reason he had explicitly said that he's not taking like any of the elven languages. And I said okay, because hey, you do what you want to do. He was playing like some sort of outcast elf, so you work with your players, you adapt their backgrounds. I said okay. If he wants to limit himself that way, that's fine with me. So nobody understands what this kobold is saying. The kobold doesn't understand what they're saying. So after a moment of just staring blankly at one another, he goes back to cleaning the blood off the wall. So the lead fighter approaches the kobold, and he speaks loudly, slowly, and demandingly, as like almost exactly like you'd see the stereotypical person that is speaking to somebody that they don't understand their language, but they think just speaking louder and slower will somehow manage to make it understood. He says, "Hey, kobold, what are you doing?" Oh my god. So first of all, I do that. I'm sitting there like, what the hell are you doing? So after a moment's thought, I'm thinking, well, this kobold still can't understand him because he doesn't speak common. So the kobold janitor looks at him and he says, slowly and loudly in kobold, "I don't understand what you're saying," except, of course, I'm like, does anybody speak kobold? No, he says something very slowly and loudly back, except I don't translate it because nobody understands kobold. And then the kobold turns to get his broom and starts sweeping. At which point, the rogue in the back decides, okay, well, this sucks. I'm going to take a pot shot at him. He pulls up his crossbow and he shoots at it. I think he had a crossbow. Might have had a bow. Might have had a short bow. I remember he just pulled up his weapon and shot at him. And I seem to recall not really remembering much because this rogue didn't last long after that. Because as soon as he shoots, he actually misses. He rolls like a 3. And the shot goes wide. So I'm like, well, okay, they jumped the Kobold. Roll initiative. So everybody rolls initiative. Kobold wins initiative. Kobold wins initiative by a lot. So I have him go ahead. He's got his broom in hand. The main fighter is right there. And I'm thinking, well, what do I do here? Because the fighter's clearly... I mean, they're still... They're first level, but the fighter's probably going to be able to take even a second level fighter Kobold. So the Kobold's got initiative, and they have speed factor adjustments and such for wielding weapons and such. But I decided, well, instead of fighting the fighter right off, what the Kobold's going to do is he's going to run over to that cart of his and hide behind it. Because he doesn't know that the fighter's going to attack him. What he knows is that the rogue just shot at him. So he runs around behind the cleaning cart and takes cover. Doesn't fight back. I'm sitting there basically giving these guys an out. Basically, like, you know, if you want to kill a seemingly unarmed Kobold Janitor, because the Kobold Janitor doesn't actually have any weapons except for his broom, which he has specialization in, but the party doesn't know that. So next person goes down in line, and it's the wizard who starts to advance forward. Because back then, wizards didn't really get more than one spell. And specialist wizards at first level got 2 spells. One of them specialty and 1 first level spell. If you were a generalist mage, you got 1 spell. This guy was a specialist. He had used his general spell, but he still had like Burning Hands memorized. Unfortunately, that requires you to be real close. So he starts advancing up, and then the fighter runs up and around the cart and makes an attack on the Kobold and misses. At which point, the rest of the party's like just cursing, because at this point 2 people have missed. Although the fighter didn't miss by much. He missed by like, I think he rolled enough to hit AC 9, and the Kobold's like AC 7 in what he's got. So he only missed by like 2 points. So then the cleric starts being the voice of reason, saying, "Hey guys, do we really want to attack a janitor?" And the other people really wouldn't have it. The rogue, readies another shot, takes his bow out, starts circling around so he can get another shot. Next round, you roll initiative each round in 2nd edition. It's not like today where you roll initiative once and then it just cycles through. Each round, you get an entirely new group of initiatives. So, next round, the wizard gets initiative. He runs up, but his movement, because he's pretty encumbered, because he has like almost no strength, so even his basic gear is encumbering him. And he moves up and he gets like almost around the cart, but not quite. And then it's the Kobold's turn. So I have the Kobold grab cleaning bottle, and he immediately sprays the fighter with it. So I'm like, okay, fighter, make a breath weapon. Save versus breath weapon. And the fighter's like, oh, okay. And he ends up rolling very, very poorly. It's in 2nd edition, saving throws are not your strength, dexterity. The 2nd edition saving throws don't follow like 3rd, 4th, or 5th edition ones. Remember, back in 3rd, you had like reflex versus or fort or will. In 5th edition, you have based on your statistics. Back in 2nd edition and earlier, it was based on categories. And breath weapon is basically what you use to avoid clouds of things. So he rolls very poorly, and he immediately gets sprayed. So he's basically sprayed. But in order to be fair, I said, okay, now you're going to roll a save versus poison. He says, why save versus poison? Is it poisonous? I said, no, I'm trying to be nice here. see what happens when this stuff gets in your eyes. And he's like, oh, okay. So he rolls save versus poison, and he completely flubs it. So he has been blinded. He is blind. So then the kobold circles around towards the mage. Gets in melee with the mage. At this point, the rogue takes another shot, which I thought was hilarious because he was shooting into melee. Boing. So because the kobold is now right by the mage. Shoots into melee. Misses them all. Mage is sitting. The mage's player sitting there cursing. I'm right there in melee. Why did you shoot into melee with me? Because at that point there was, I believe, I know there was in first edition. I think I had modified the first edition rule into second edition, where it's basically if you're firing into melee, you randomly pick which one you attack. And he had basically rolled to attack the mage, and he ended up missing the mage. And so the cleric finally draws his weapon and starts walking up. Slowly, I might add. Cleric does not want to fight this kobold. So next round, initiative right off the start. And the kobold wins initiative. Sprays the mage point blank with that cleaner. Cleaner in the eyes. Spray, spray, spray. Mage flubs it. Flubs the save versus poison. Mage is blind. So, my eyes. God damn it, my eyes. So you got two characters. A group of 4. 2 characters sitting there just, oh, I can't see anything. Fighters are like, oh, I can't see anything. So the fighter goes ahead and swings his sword randomly. And he's like, well, I go around towards the kobold. And I'm sitting there saying, well, which way do you go? And he's like, does it matter? And I said, well, yeah, it matters because you have no idea where this kobold is. All you hear is the mage across the cart screaming and shouting. So he goes ahead and walks around. He does get the right size, but he's swinging at the kobold. He can't hit. And the rogue goes next. And the rogue takes a shot into melee again. Everybody, the rest of the players on the end, so like, stop it! Stop firing into melee! And this time he natural 20s, but then on the choose a target, he hits the fighter. So he's boom, hit the fighter with an arrow. Fighter's like, I took an arrow. Oh, seriously wounded. So the cleric walks up, and then the mage casts Burning Hands. And he just... It was like, okay, I just cast Burning Hands, and I try to catch everything in front of me. And I'm like, really? It's like, yeah, I can't see anything. All I know is that little bastard is right there in front of me. I'm going to cast Burning Hands and just sweep the area. So he cast Burning Hands, and he swept the area. Alright, so the kobold manages to avoid the worst of it. The kobold actually rolls pretty well. He manages to avoid it. He still takes some damage, but he manages to avoid it. The issue is that you've got an entire cart. You've got an entire cart full of cleaning supplies and old dust on it. And there's like this cloth draped over the thing. It's got old rags draped over it. And all of those items then get caught in it. And I basically go roll... I'm rolling for each item. And they're like, why are you rolling for each item? I said, look, you just Burning Hands a cart full of very flammable stuff. Oh, and you also Burning Hands the fighter, and so the fighter takes a little bit more damage. And he's sitting there cussing up a storm because he just got hit by an arrow. He just got Burning Hands, and he's down to like 2 hit points. I'm rolling through, and the cart... Like nothing on the cart saves. Everything goes up in flames. So all of a sudden you've got this flaming cart just whoosh, fills the corridor there with fire. Does a secondary burst because I figured it out beforehand. Like, well, you can also these bottles of cleaner will basically act like thrown oil if they ignite. They ignited, so basically they do a little bit of area damage. Mage gets cooked, goes down. Fighter gets cooked, goes down. Kobold takes fire damage, does not go down, but he's sitting there at 1 hit point. Cleric is like standing in the back, just staring wide-eyed. at the whole thing. And he's like, well, I run over and try to see if I can save either of my friends. And he walks down, he goes up there, and he manages to bandage the wizard. He bandages the wizard. And he did not have any healing spells left for the day. As I said, second edition, clerics ended up doing a little bit better than wizards in second edition because they got one first level spell. They did get bonuses for high wisdom. He had already used all his cure light wounds. He doesn't have any healing, so he goes ahead and bandages the wizard. Next round, Kobold wins initiative. Kobold flees that burning cart. Cleric's not in a position to take an attack at him as he flees. So they're like, oh, yay, he's going away. And I say, no. What he's doing is he's grabbing that broom and he's running up towards the rogue. Okay, the rogue's in melee now. Kobold's looking pretty worse for wear. But the rogue's in melee now. So Kobold makes an attack with the broom. Max damage. Boom. Rogue goes down. One hit. Rogue goes down. The rest of the group's laughing their asses off because the rogue pretty much if it wasn't for him hitting the fighter by accident, the fighter would still be up at this point. But everybody's laughing at us. That teaches you to shoot into melee. And so the cleric turns around. He watches this kobold basically just wham, just knock the rogue down with a single broom swipe. And all of a sudden, the cleric is realized that he is there alone. Everybody is unconscious except for him. It's just him and the Kobold Janitor. Duel for the ages. So the cleric straightens up, looks at that Kobold, looks at his KO'd companions, looks at the still burning cart of cleaning supplies. And he runs. He just books it. He just flat out runs. And I'm sitting there. I had expected this kobold to do some damage. This kobold was like basically at one hit point at this point. I had expected him to do some damage. I had not expected him to take the entire group up. And, come to think of it, he didn't really take the rest of the group out. He did not take the group out. It was that burning hands that took the group out. But that cleric just booked it. I mean, he just ran for the exit. Didn't bother with his companions. So I'm sitting there going, well, does the kobold actually just kill the rest of the group? Because they're all assuming they lost their characters. I'm like, no, you know what the kobold does? Just start sweeping the floor. Start putting the bodies on the side and sweeping up the ashes and cleaning up the battle site. But with the cleric gone, none of the party survived. The kobold didn't kill him. The wizard did eventually wake up, only to find the other two dead because they hadn't been bandaged, and they did eventually bleed out. They were under death's door. Death's door. I was using death's door rules. Second edition death's door. If you're under 10, if you're under 0 hit points, you take a point of damage every round until you hit negative 10. It's what the later editions basically adapted. But the wizard was the only one that ended up living because he had been bandaged before the cleric fled. So, the cleric ended up living too because he ran. So it was just funny as because this wizard wakes up, looks at, there's no sign of the battle because the kobold janitor had cleaned it up, and he's lying there between two dead party members, and he just sneaks his way out and goes to town. And I'm sitting there going, the other two were he was actually in the process of rolling up another character because the other two had done it already. Cleric got back to town, Wizard had some words with that cleric. The first thing that wizard did when he got to town was to track down that cleric and have some words with him. But that, I think I'm going to wrap it here, because that is how a single Kobold Janitor wiped out an entire group in AD&D 2nd edition. Sometimes joke NPCs. Sometimes joke NPCs can be pretty harsh. And I guess the lesson really is if you ain't got to attack it, don't attack it. There was no reason for them to engage that janitor except for being complete assholes. And, well, they did it. They attacked. And they reaped the whirlwind. Anyway, this has been the RPG Crawler with RPG Storytime. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. And I'll try to be back with more of these. I'm enjoying going down memory lane with them. I certainly have enough stories to tell. Until next time, take care and goodbye.